Absolutely. Thank you both so much for being here. Congratulations on a phenomenal film, my favorite film of the year. Let's have a round of applause for that. And to just jump in, obviously, Adam, the personal is political. It's a phrase I feel like only scratches the top of the iceberg when you're talking about Dick and Lynne Cheney and the stratego pieces that they place across the political landscape. I'd like to ask you, though, about how important casting is always important, but how important it is to a film like this where these are figures we know, some we should know, some we know more than others, and the importance of sort of weighing those decisions in the writing process and in the casting process and as production goes along.
Yeah, I felt like with this movie, casting was essential. I mean, every movie, it's huge. But there's a mystery at the center of this movie. Obviously, Dick Cheney is a bit of an enigma. Not a bit of an enigma, a huge enigma. And when I discovered that Lynne was such a huge part of the story, I really needed actors that I knew were going to kind of go on that mystery, that detective story with me, trying to figure out who these people were. And when you look at that list, you come up pretty quickly with names like Amy and Christian Bale and Sam Rockwell. And sure enough, they took on the challenge, and the actors really ended up informing the movie as we went through it in a way that I've never experienced before.
Amy, another amazing performance from you. And here you yes. And here, you really
I just want to embarrass Amy.
I'm
Applaud
bad at
again for her.
I had to be trained to say thank you when I got a compliment, and it only started taking like last year. I was like, don't say anything back, just say thank you. Yeah.
Well, you defy expectations here in so many ways as Lynne Cheney. She obviously is the power that is fueling Dick Cheney. She's the one who sets him on his path, but there are these elements to her. She contains multitudes. I'm wondering what some of the keys were to her that helped you kind of figure her out.
I didn't really know a lot about Lynne Cheney when I began the process, so it was a wonderful discovery of really all I knew about Lynne Cheney were people's opinions of her. And so it would have been easy to go in with this judgment of other people's experience of her and their opinion of her opinions, which she shares quite openly. So when I began research, I was lucky enough she wrote a biography and an autobiography talking about her childhood, and it gave me a totally different perspective. And suddenly I was like, Lynne Cheney is my grandmother, and so she became very personal to me. And I think having a personal relationship with a character like that, who maybe on the surface, and I hate to say this about my grandmother, is hard and maybe hard to get to know. On the inside, you start to understand their motivations, and you understand their love of country, and their love of family, and that sort of allows you to a different perspective. And so it was important for me to come in without any judgment and just kind of get to know, a woman. Yeah.
And in fact, obviously she has such an astute intelligence and a drive, but there's also sort of an Americana, an accessibility, as we see in the scene when she's helping, when Dick is running for Congress and she campaigns for him, that it's almost like it's a secret weapon in some ways, that accessibility, that Americana that she has, that Dick obviously didn't have, but she could relate to people on a very kind of personal level, couldn't she?
Yeah, I think she wasn't afraid to state her opinion, which allowed for people to identify with her who shared the same opinion, which I think we're seeing now is a very popular thing, But it was that sort of pioneer spirit that was really recognizable to me. And sort of, my grandma's from Utah. We would go to rodeos. It sounded very much, she was a farm girl. It sounded very similar, the environment they were raised in.
Well, I like when you say, she's hard. And
it's hard to know.
Well,
No.
but
Yeah.
I mean, my grandmother was the same way. She was from Texas, and she told me a story about a tornado was coming, and they went in the root cellar, and they were knee high in water, and they heard the sound of a rattlesnake. Mm-hmm. And I think that is an important part of this movie. There's a heritage, there's a history to America that does infuse the Cheneys, infuse where we are now, that is key to this movie. And I think you're absolutely right. One of the crazy stories we were talking about was Lynne has all these tragic deaths in her family. and actually had an aunt who was losing her house. A banker had ripped her off, and she walked around the house with 10 acres, this orchard, to say goodbye to it. And she took out a blanket, a red blanket, and kind of unfurled it to sit on the blanket. And they had a bull that they had raised as a calf that they came and gored her aunt. And her aunt, of course, there's no hospital within 200 miles, had to be taken on a train. And that kind of edge, I feel like Amy really brought that to the movie, this kind of tough Americana, middle of the country edge, which is central.
You're not going to get Lynne off her feet.
Nope.
No. As hard as you push, she will always stay grounded. Yeah.
Another thing I pick up in the performance is almost like a reverse manifest destiny in a way. These are people from Wyoming who have a sense of what the country should be, what values are important to them, and they want to bring that to the halls of power. They want to bring that east to D.C. and make that obviously part of the political and cultural landscape. These very sort of root parts of themselves, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, Lynne's very much in love with American history and sort of how it's taught in the schools, and that was one of her missions, was changing the way that the schools approach humanities.
She also wrote a fiction book about a family that came west during westward expansion in the 1800s or something, right? So
she's written or co-authored and authored 29 books or more. Yeah, she's prolific, and she has a doctorate. She brought a lot to the table, so you can understand how she would be such a huge motivation.
She invented
for Dick.
She invented the chainsaw. Actually, it's true.
Anyway,
that's a fact.
But I think her motivation was, I'm sure that it was very helpful.
Well, I also think that's part of the. See if you agree. I think it's part of a little bit what I love about Lynne is that she came from this time, and if you read her autobiography, all her heroes are her grade school teachers. And those were the only women that she knew that were professional women. It was like grade school teachers and some nurses. And it's kind of heartbreaking when you read it, this was it. So her dream for her and Dick, they wanted to become college professors. And you realize that, if Lynne had been born 20 years later, she probably would have been a very famous senator or a governor, like an Ann Richards type governor, probably not politically the same. But yeah, there's that sense of that Lynne's a special person who's kind of closed off, not allowed to blossom.
Yeah. She's of her time and then transcends her time in so many ways and moves it forward. And we have to talk about Christian Bale's amazing performance. Let's give him a round of applause, please. And how, Adam, he helps us sort of understand these sort of Cheney mannerisms that we know so well now after so many years. The grunt, the kind of the pull of the lip, the folding of the hands. What I love is that more than just inhabit that performance, he really helps us understand, kind of interpret what those Cheneyisms sort of mean, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the real treats of working with actors like this, is there's nothing that's accidental. And one of the big things about Cheney is he kind of has this tension in the right side of his jaw that he kind of holds, and Bale figured out what that was, and he was like, that was Cheney getting in bar fights and drinking as a young man, and Lynne told him stop, so it all went in his jaw. And I was like, God, that is effing genius. That is so good. And so every gesture that you see in the movie, none of it's by accident with any of these guys. Everything's been based on character. And there's a great moment where Rumsfeld makes a joke about, hey, Dick, have you gotten nastier or you're just not getting laid? And Bale does this weird thing where he sits forward. And Bale had found that from an interview where that's how Cheney got angry during an interview, was he didn't say anything. He just kind of abruptly kind of changed his position. And so it's a very fun thing to see these guys, operate at that level.
when he puts his hands out, it's seen the film now 3 times. It almost feels like he's weaving together some sort of almost kind of barrier between himself and the truth, or between himself and whoever he's conversing with. And this amazing ensemble of actors. I'm going to rattle off some of their names. They deserve all of them a round of applause. Steve Carell, obviously Sam Rockwell, as we said, Alison Pill, Jesse Plemons, Lily Rabe, Tyler Perry, Justin Kirk. Let's focus on Sam Rockwell and obviously on Steve Carell for a moment, because their performances, they bring different levels of understanding as well. What Carell does as Rumsfeld is sort of find that maniacal edge to him, but also sort of a bit of neediness, and how he was driven in some ways by a guy being from another era. It's a soft touch now, not the hard touch. That's an interesting kind of approach to Rumsfeld in some ways, right?
Yeah, Rumsfeld's he's really funny because he's so obvious. You can listen to all the Nixon tapes, and there's tapes of Nixon with Haldeman and all these guys who are, some of the biggest creeps of the 20th century, and they're all talking about how horrible Rumsfeld is. and then Nixon's going, I don't know, I kind of like him. And so his entire career, Rumsfeld always had his cards pointed out. He was never hiding anything. One of my favorite moments, and it's actually a character-defining moment that's not from Carell, but is when Amy is in bed with Dick and Rumsfeld's lost his career. And she says, tell Don we're not moving just because everyone hates him in the White House. And that's Rumsfeld in a nutshell.
Yeah, and Sam Rockwell as George W. Bush, there's layers to him. I mean, we sort of know, obviously, this about Bush, but he was sort of a guy out of place. And you see in Rockwell's performance that sense of almost like a little boy having to pretend to be a grown-up. And there's aspects to him that are sort of, the shaking leg and everything like that. There's so many different and interesting levels to that performance. Let's talk about how you and Rockwell approached that performance.
I think Sam had one of the hardest jobs because he had to stare in the face of Will Ferrell's impression that's so ubiquitous, and obviously I've written for that a bunch. So when I sat down with Sam, I just said, you have a really hard job here because we're not doing, impersonations in this movie. We're doing impressions. And we want to, reorganize the character, but you have to deal with Ferrell's impression that's out there. And the truth is, W. Bush is funny. Like, he is an odd guy. Like I said before, his first job after he left Yale was selling tropical plants for a couple of years. He has a 10-year gap in his resume where he didn't work at all. He just lived in a Houston singles condominium and partied. He's really a character. So, as a director, I'm just spoiled when you have people like Sam come in there, and he just, he found this kind of human center to W. Bush where you're kind of like feel bad for him, but at the same time, you're like, don't you get it? Yeah. And it's a really incredible performance, what he pulled off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amy, what was one of the trickiest aspects of Lynne for you to kind of get to, or maybe one of the trickiest scenes? I mean, the Shakespeare scene obviously comes to mind. There's so many things going on in that amazing scene. What were some of the trickiest ones for you?
The Shakespeare, it posed challenges, but that's what attracts me to a role. Yeah. But I also think, just interpreting a person that people have an opinion about, and trying not to get caught up in your own opinion or judgment. Clearing yourself to be present in the moment of what is needed in the scene is always what I'm attracted to. But honestly, working with Christian, even if it's challenging, I want to make it seem like it's not a challenge, it's a gift. And getting to work on this movie, I felt like I grew so much. Adam encouraged us to take things as far as we could. And so I really felt I stretched how far I was comfortable going inside of a character, and letting go of likability, which for me as an actress is something that I always aim to do, because there's nothing, I don't like her. I'm like, you're not supposed to like her. Right, that's, because I feel like often male characters are allowed to be unlikable, and people have glee in the fact that they're unlikable. But if a woman's unlikable, they're like, But also in that moment, creating a reality and an understanding of her. But it was a gift for me, and I do feel like I really, moving forward, I learned so much on this set about investment and research, and it just was a whole different level of investment.
And your physicality is transformative here too. Obviously, there's so much of that is sort of like as Lynne sort of moves through the world, we're seeing her sort of be a formidable figure in a lot of ways. And I would imagine that the physicality of it was an important aspect of the performance.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. I mean, and creating a character from the time she was 20 till what did we set in her 70s when we leave them. And the thing is when you look at Lynne, she aged, but she always looked like Lynne. So it was tricky, I know, and my face is quite moon, and Lynne's is kind of like, I'm as I get older, I think I'm going to be one of those people who just gets a really jolly face, whereas Lynne's kind of like she gets a little more hollow. I'm just going to get jollier looking.
Jolly.
Well, jowly is probably closer.
Jowly.
No, I said jolly. That's how I talk about. Anyway, I digress. I'm going on, but yes, the physicality was really important as far as postures and the speed of movement and the way a voice thins as you age. Those were all things that needed to be considered and taken into.
I love the moment where Liz comes to Dick and Lynne and says, "What am I going to do? You know, they're going after me. I have to, they're saying I support my sister's gay marriage." And there's this unspoken moment between Dick and Lynne, but Amy does this incredible moment where like the decision is made, but it's unspoken. And then you do this smile like, it's the way life is. We move on. And it's, oh my God, it resonated with me in a way, like it reminded me of my mother, my grandmother. Like it was such a incredible moment. There's so much of that throughout the movie, but that moment in particular always stuck with me.
That's an amazing moment.
Thank you.
As is
Give
the
it up
scene-
for Amy Adams.
Yeah, so-
Everyone, please.
Also, the scene in the ballroom when they're walking through, and there's almost like a ship or a shark kind of moving through, and there's nothing that's going to stop them and stop her.
Lynne has this wonderful way of smiling without actually her lips going up. So that was always fun to work on, to try to figure out, because my smile is kind of big and square, and she's got a very
The other thing people don't
sideways smile.
know about Amy is she's a great improviser. And so at the end of that Christmas scene, we would always have a little transition line that would take us into the next scene. And I think we did 14 different lines, and it would always be what you were kind of picking up as we pushed in. So the one that's in the movie is they finish talking to a couple, and Amy just says, "They're brilliant, but broke." But we had like 12 other lines. She's very smart, but she drives a sob. And like, it would just be, well, one of my favorite lines.
That's all Amy improvising.
Oh, that's
great.
totally Amy. And one of my favorite lines is after Dick gives the horrible campaign speech, she says, either he drinks next time or I do. I would totally improvise.
Adam gave us a lot of freedom to sort of move through our characters in that way. But you can't embrace that freedom without a script that has a beautiful structure and an understanding of character. So even with the freedom to improvise, it's taken off of a beautiful script and a script that was so well written, and the characters were so well defined and so unique. The storytelling, it gave you a lot of freedom to move within that. So.
Well, there's also you and Christian. They just have a really special energy between them. So things would organically happen on set all the time.
Well, Christian is he's so focused and so in the character but yet he will break. And so it's like my favorite thing to try to get him to break, at appropriate times, like not in the middle of like a serious scene or anything. But my favorite thing that always got him, and I would try to do it at weird times, is go, "Oh, that's Ducky." That's Ducky. Nixon got fired. He's like, "Did you just say Ducky?" And that was it. So that was my favorite thing to say when I couldn't think of any other improv, is just Ducky.
And in the Cheney makeup, just breaking at that moment, character would just be like.
Well, at the Shakespeare scene, I don't think we laughed, but I wore these teeth to sort of make my teeth look more yellow, and I was leaning over him, and as I got to the end, because I was starting to froth a little bit, like literally froth up in my mouth, and I would just start like lisping. I like sharing funny stuff because it seems so serious, but there was some.
Well, we actually have a moment in the movie where Bale totally breaks, and it's when he's with Bush, and he says, the economy, military, and Bush goes, "That sounds good." And my brilliant editor, Hank Corwin, actually put a beat of Bale completely breaking and then snapping back. I mean, you guys obviously caught it, but yeah, it's fun whenever, and then only Bale is cool enough when he saw the movie. Some actors would be like, "You have to take that out." He was like, "Oh, I love that."
Well, it translates almost as a sense of disbelief, or is this guy for real, or I can't believe this is actually the point that we're at with him. Yeah, so it reads in a couple of different ways. Amy's point about it being serious and funny, it's so crucial because this movie is deadly serious, but there are also hilarious moments in it, and that level of satire, Mike Nichols' level of satire, is extraordinary. And how important was that for you, Adam, from the get-go, to make sure that kind of walked that tightrope line?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about that. I mean, I remember, Amy, on the Shakespeare scene, we were talking about, do you do this as a put-on? Do you do it sincere? My default setting was sincere. Always do things as well as you can do them. And but I also think, and a little bit with the last movie, The Big Short, and way more so with this one, that we're just living in a time where I honestly can't tell you if it's, a tragedy or the greatest comedy ever. I keep talking about that image of whether you support him or not, the image of Trump talking about how you have to rake the woods with Jerry Brown is one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. I mean, it's if you wrote that into a comedy, if Charlie Chaplin had done that, it would just be way too far. And when I watched it, I didn't know whether to be really, really sad or just laugh hysterically. And I think this movie has a little bit of that as well. I think it's a crazy story. The story of this woman from Wyoming and this bureaucratic kind of quiet guy who encounter this guy who used to own the Texas Rangers who's becoming president. On the face of it is very funny, but then at the same time, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people die and are tortured, and our country kind of careens off into a drainage ditch. So it's very tricky. The tone was one of the big challenges of this movie all along, and once again, spoiled with great actors who would give us different looks in every scene.
Well, it's so accessible, and it's a perfect tone, I think, in so many ways. Perfect to explain where we were, how we got to where we are for this time and others. If I could ask everyone just to stay in their seats, but Amy and Adam have a couple of minutes outside, so if you want to go out to the lobby, we'll see you out there. But let's have a round of applause, please, for Amy Adams and Adam McKay. The film is Vice.